Hi, this is Rob McLaughlin. Welcome to Sound Advice. Today, we're going to continue on talking about mixing for the band. Last time we talked about using DCAs as a remote control for a group of faders. Today, we're going to look at using groups, which are sometimes called subgroups, depending on the equipment that you're using or the manufacturer of the board that you're using. We'll be using the Q32 today, but it applies to the Q32, the Q24, the QPAC, and the QSB. All right, let's talk about subgroups. Okay, so one of the important things we talked about is understanding that a group or subgroup involves processing audio. However, on the Q series boards, we get the option to change a group to be either a subgroup or a mix. And so let's go over here to look at this group. If I select the group, then over here you'll see that this group is a mix. And if I select 3-4, I've set that group or that to be a group. So if I go into routing, group 3-4, and this is where we'll change this. Group 3-4, I've changed it from a mix to a group, and group 1-2 is a mix rather than a group. So what's the difference between a group and a mix? A mix allows you to replicate the same kind of functionality you have with any of the other mixes available on your board. So you can basically turn these four stereo groups on the Q32 into four more stereo mixes or monitor mixes. So where I have four mono mixes for monitors and three stereo mixes, typically for monitors, I can also turn these four groups into mixes, stereo mixes, giving me another four stereo mixes for monitors. And again, simply by selecting the group, I have the option to change it from a group to a mix, and I simply select either one. When I do that, by the way, I'll get a confirmation because it's going to change all the settings that are involved in that particular group, whether it's a group or a mix. So in this case, I want group 1-2 to be a mix. I need another monitor mix, so I'm going to turn group 1-2 into a mix, and again, simply by selecting here. Now it works just the same as any of my other mixes for mixing monitors. But in group 3-4, I'm going to turn that into a group. And again, just simply selecting on the screen, I choose group versus mix. And the important thing here is that now a group is a collection of channels that we're going to assign to that group. And then we can manipulate the sound of that group of channels as a single unit, as a subgroup of channels. Again, the important difference is that we're talking about routing audio into a subgroup. In previous video, we talked about DCAs, where we don't route audio. There's no audio involved in a DCA. It's strictly a remote control for a group of faders. In this case now, this is going to be a group for a collection of channels that we're going to assign to that group, and then we're going to mix the audio. Let's look at the process of assigning groups now that we have decided that we have group 1-2 is going to be a mix. And so I can now create a monitor mix just the same as I would for any of the other mixes. But in group 3-4 is actually going to be a subgroup. And so we've chosen it to be in group mode. So now we have to assign a set of channels to this group. And we do that using the assign button on the far left of on the Q32 and all of the Q series actually. So I select the assign button, and when I hold the assign button, any assigned channels will light up. The select button will light up, and you'll notice, of course, as I press assign here now, nothing lights up. So I need to assign some channels into that group. So I hold the assign button, and I'm going to assign the first 8. Let's assume that my first 8 channels, let's assume they are my drum kit. And so I want to manage my drum kit as a single subgroup. So holding assign, I turn on the channels that I want to assign to the subgroup. Again, I've got group 3-4 selected. hit assign, turn on the channels I want to assign to the group. Now, it's also important that you realize that what we're now doing, because a group is going to process the audio from those channels, I'm taking all the input from those channels and I'm now routing them into this subgroup. The subgroup comes back into left and right. So what I want to also make sure is when I assign those 8 channels to my subgroup, I also want to go to left and right and again select assign and unassign those same channels from left and right. Again, holding the assign button here, I'm going to unassign or turn off those same 8 channels because I don't want the audio to go to left and right and also to the subgroup, which is then being routed into left and right. Now I have 2 audio signals from those 8 channels going to the same destination, and I don't want that. I only want the audio from those 8 channels to go into the subgroup. The subgroup is then going to feed left and right. So I want to make sure that those 8 channels do not also feed left and right. Sometimes that'll trip people up because if you don't unassign them from left and right, again, I'm looking at left and right. If you don't unassign those 8 channels, then the audio is going to 2 places. It's going to left and right, and it's also going to the subgroup, which is then going to left and right. So you turn down the channel in the subgroup, but the audio continues, and that's because it's also routed directly to left and right. And so we want to make sure when we assign a channel to a subgroup, we unassign it from left and right. So again, I'm looking at left and right, unassign those 8 channels. Looking at group 3-4, assign, there I've assigned my channel. So now the audio from those 8 channels is only going to one place. It's going to the group. The group then feeds left and right. Now, as well as assigning the channels that are coming into that subgroup, we can also assign where that subgroup goes out. And we said we unassigned those 8 channels from left and right. Now they're only assigned to the subgroup, and the subgroup goes to left and right. Well, that's a default, but it can be changed. So on the same screen here, where we've selected group 3-4 to change the mode, by the way, there's a shortcut I didn't mention a moment ago when I was talking about assigning channels. There is an all on or all off assign, just to make it quick rather than selecting assign and going through all of the channels, or unassign and going through all the channels. There's just a shortcut right there. That's all that is. So we've got 8 channels coming into the subgroup. Now where are we sending the subgroup out to? Well, this is the next tab here. We'll go to what's called Mix Sends. And you'll see here now, this is group 3-4, and this is telling us where we are sending that subgroup. And by default, again, we've sent it to all of our mixes, including left and right. And if we don't want that subgroup, for instance, to go to left and right, for whatever reason, we're only sending it to a mix for, recording or something or other like that, we could just turn off left and right. And the same too, again, we could turn off that subgroup in any of the mixes. So I don't want the result of that subgroup going into a particular mix. I can just turn it off. Okay, just on, off. So that's how we assign the output of this particular group, this subgroup, to any of our mixes, including left and right. Now, while we're on the screen, let's talk about pre and post. So we can also assign to any of those mixes as pre or post. In other words, and if you watch one of my other videos, we talked about, pre and post. What's the difference between pre and post? Pre is a copy of the signal before it gets to the fader, or pre-fader, and post is a copy of the signal after the fader. So the post is affected by the fader. So again, do I want the group to be controlled by the faders in that mix? Then that should be a post mix. Otherwise, we'll leave it as a pre-mix so that only my changes to the group will be affected in the mix. Notice there is no pre or post option on left and right. So the left and right does not have a pre or post right there. That is because the left and right is always post. In other words, I'm making changes to my group. I'm making the same changes that I'm making to left and right. That's why For instance, if I go to left and right, let's go left and right. You can see my channel configuration here, left and right. If I go to my subgroup, this doesn't change. All right, and that is because it is the same set of controls. It's the same set of fader controls from left and right to the group. They are post left and right. It's hard-coded as post. You can't change that. So change that I make to left and right will be affected. So if I change left and right, I take this microphone way down on channel 1. See, if I go to group 3, 4, remember those 8 channels are assigned to the group. That's the same change that's going to appear there. So it's post by default on left and right, but it can be changed for any of the other mixes. All right, let's take a look at how we manage bringing that group now that we've taken, for instance, 8 channels. Maybe this is going to be our drum kit. We've assigned it to group 3, 4 so that we can manage group 3, 4. If I go to group 3, 4, I go to processing, group 3, 4, processing. I've got my parametric EQ. Again, this is group 3, 4. I've got a graphic EQ. I've got a compressor limiter. So I can do all of that processing on this group. Now of those 8 channels now as a single unit. So how do I bring that group signal back into different mixes? Well, again, let's go to the routing screen, and we saw that we can simply turn them on and off in different mixes, but what if we want different levels in different mixes? Well, I said by default it is routed post to left and right. Okay, so as I select group 3, 4, group 3, 4, now my master, watch, there is the level going up in left and right. By default, the master of the group is the send to left and right. So there's the level going into left and right. Okay, so that's the default. It will always show up in left and right, unless, of course, you actually turn it off. That's the only option. For other mixes, let's say I want that group, now that I've mixed my drum kit, 8 channels, into a group, and I want to bring that group signal back into, let's say, someone's monitor mix, which is mix 1. Well, it's turned on for mix 1. That's great. So go to mix 1, and then we go to the upper layer. So this is my channel layer. If I go to my upper layer, you'll see that I have group 1, 2 master, group 3, 4 master. So I can now bring up that group in mix 1, basically the same as I would do as if it was an effects return. For instance, I could, if I was bringing up an effects return, I could bring this up as an input to mix 1, and that would bring that group into mix 1. Now again, very important to also think about the rest of your routing. If I want to put that group into mix 1, the same thing applies about channel assign. Back in left and right, I unassigned those channels. Let's go to left and right, back to my channel layer. Excuse me, my channel layer. 1 to 8, select assign. I unassigned those channels so that I wouldn't have the audio going into left and right as well as into the group, which is then feeding left and right. And I would end up with 2 audio signals going into left and right. If I decide that I want to bring that group 3, 4 into, say, for instance, mix 1, I'll have to do the same thing. I've got to go to mix 1 and again look at my assign. If I'm going to bring group 3, 4, which is those 8 channels, as a return here, group 3, 4 in mix 1, then I also need to make sure that I unassign those 8 channels from mix 1. Okay, and I've got to turn them off in mix 1. Okay, now I strongly recommend that you sit down and map out what you're going to do when it comes to routing groups, etc. Because if you turn off this routing or this assign, then those faders are no longer part of mix 1. So you can't go to mix 1 and turn up a channel as part of the drum kit because they're no longer assigned to mix 1. You would have to go to left and right and adjust that, because that's what is sending to group 3-4. So you really need to think about how you want to route signal. Do you want the individual channels to be assigned, or do you want the group to be assigned? Again, something to think about and be aware of. Before we leave this routing screen, let's also talk about the last couple of tabs here. We talked about the mix sends, where we can send this group into any or all of the mixes. We can also send this group into any of the effects engines. And again, just simply turning them on and off to send them or not send them. You can also have them pre or post, depending on your choice of how that sound is going to be processed. We could also send them to a matrix, and we'll talk a little bit about matrix actually in the upcoming video very shortly. And we could also send that group into a DCA group. We talked about a DCA group being just for remote control of a group of faders. We could actually include a group into one of those DCA groups so that we could have remote control of that fader as well. And also on this screen, we can assign it into a mute group, so that if we have a soft key assigned here to mute a group of channels, we could include that group in one of those mute groups as well. All right, thanks very much for joining us today. Again, I hope that the information about subgroups has been helpful. Again, just to recap, want to make sure that you assign the appropriate channels to your subgroup or your group, which, by the way, can be either a group or a mix. If you need additional monitor mixes, you can simply turn those groups into additional mixes. So we want to assign the channels. We also want to make sure that we unassign the channels from the destination. So if we're sending the group to left and right, which is the default, we want to make sure that we unassign those channels from left and right so we don't have two signals going to the same destination. All right, hopefully that's been helpful. I want to say thank you very much for everybody who subscribed. If you haven't yet, click that little button to subscribe, and we appreciate you being part of the group here. Thank you very much.